My focus as a catalyst has been very much around enabling people to do things they couldn't do before, rather than just doing it myself.
I think there are different kinds of catalytic leaders. There are the out in front catalysts, and then there are the behind the scenes catalysts. And so far in my career, I've been more the behind the scenes kind. And I think it's kind of an underrated and like understudied area of change in a lot of ways.
Hi, I'm Tracy Lovejoy.
And I'm Shannon Lucas. We are the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to empowering catalysts to create bold, powerful change in the world.
This is our podcast, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, where we speak with Catalyst executives about ways to successfully lead transformation in large organizations.
And today we're thrilled to have time with not one, but two amazing catalysts, Tiffany West and Stephen Kelner. Tiffany oversees the development and delivery of Ascent programs. Prior to Ascent, Tiffany spent 11 years at the World Economic Forum, where she had multiple roles. She oversaw the program for the annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland, and regional summits around the world. She began her career in brand management with roles at the Walt Disney Company and General Mills. Steve is a president and co-founder of Ascent. He brings over 25 years of expertise in the nature of top leadership and how to evaluate and develop it, advising global firms, including creating the leadership evaluation process for two leading executive search firms. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah.
All right, so let's jump in, because that just barely scratches the surface of the amazing things that you guys have done in the world. So we'd love to hear about each of your catalytic journey, sharing a few career highlights that you're proud of that helps us see your catalytic nature. And Tiffany, why don't we start with you?
Okay, sure. I would say that there are a couple of things that have always guided or motivated me in my career, and it's many twists and turns that it's taken over the years. The first one I would say is achieving. And Steve, being a motivational psychologist, will not be surprised by this at all, but I just love to get stuff done. Nothing is more satisfying to me on a molecular level than crossing things off on a to-do list. Love it. And the second thing is really making positive change in the world. Very early in my career, I shifted from the for-profit world to the nonprofit world because I always felt like, so what at the end of the day when I was done with my work. And when I made that shift and joined the World Economic Forum, this whole new world opened up to me. And rather than being responsible for one brand or one product, I was suddenly in this position to influence global leaders and drive real large-scale change. And that was mainly behind the scenes. You know, there were these leaders out there in front of the TV cameras, but I was one of the key people behind the scenes helping to drive that. And it was this idea of, being able to run sustainability projects with C-suite executives across multiple industries, like you mentioned, running the Davos program, being able to catalyze real change from behind the scenes was a totally new experience for me, and it's very addictive, it turns out. So, that addiction to wanting to catalyze this real change actually eventually led me to leave the World Economic Forum and go down the entrepreneurial path, because I wanted to make more of a direct change rather than being just fully behind the scenes. And I wanted that entrepreneurial experience and liked that I could help leaders improve even more so they could affect even more positive change in the world with the work that we do as well. And just one thing I want to mention here is that I think there are different kinds of catalytic leaders. There are the out in front catalysts, and then there are the behind the scenes catalysts. And so far in my career, I've been more the behind the scenes kind. And I think it's kind of an underrated and like understudied area of change in a lot of ways.
It's so true. Thank you for calling that out. And I think a lot of times, even when we first started our company, people were like, well, if I'm not out in front and if I'm not playing out of my swim lane, or lots of different ways that people be like, I'm not sure I'm a catalyst. But to your point, we need them across the sort of the spectrum of the business to amplify and activate that change. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Steve, how about you?
So I guess my checkered past started because my late great mentor, David McClelland, who was a hugely influential psychologist and impacted the whole OD field, introduced me to the firm he founded, McBurr & Company, when I was just finishing off my PhD. And he said, I've introduced a lot of my students to McBurr, The problem is that they get excited about consulting and lose sight of the research. And I turned to him and I said, I'm not going to do that. And I never have. A lot of my career has been living at the intersection of better ways to do things, of innovation and research with practical and pragmatic application. And that's my form of catalytic action, is to enable people to do things they couldn't do before. And like Tiffany, I've worked behind the scenes a great deal. I've been a management consultant for much of my career. I eventually decided I had to go learn to be a manager for a while. So I went off and I thought it'd be a little more credible, and went off and became the head of a small training and consulting organization, where I also got to the intersection this time of learning about processes and structures and improvement, because it was actually an old total quality management, if anyone remembers that anymore. And I was bringing in motivation and people. So that combination of the structure and the process and the people and the drives all came together. And then I spent a lot of time, I spent some time in the .com world. So I got to be an entrepreneur, which gave me experience of building a training and consulting organization and being a leader, a startup leader. And then I went into the executive search realm, where I was the secret weapon behind the scenes to help two of the top 5 firms move from kind of insightful but intuitive approaches to understanding leaders to structure. And I had helped build the first valid set of scaled competencies I co-developed actually back at McBurr back in 1990. We applied the same things to executives, which meant we could not just say, this is bad, this is good. We could say, this is good, this is better, this is future. Right? And that's informed a lot of what we've done as a firm in terms of development and growth. But I said, my focus as a catalyst has been very much around enabling people to do things they couldn't do before, rather than just doing it myself. So my opportunity to come to here, to Ascent, was being able to kind of step out of the behind the scenes and actually lead an organization to do it. Because also I wanted to get back to developing clients directly. I did work with clients. I've always worked with clients and with colleagues. But a lot of that was behind the scenes, and it's like I miss developing leaders. And so here we are.
Amazing. And the threads about just your superpowers connected sound incredibly powerful. So I can see how you're, driving impact in the world, but also illustrating that, while our focus is mostly right now on catalysts in large organizations, as catalysts will go wherever we think we can make the most impact, or wherever that burning need starts to become, you're like, no, I need to go start having direct impact again, and let that guide us. You guys have both worked with so many catalyst leaders from some of the world's largest companies. I'm wondering what key insights you've gleaned about what it takes to be a successful catalyst leader. And Tiffany, why don't we start with you?
Sure. When I think back through my career, I think there are kind of key insights from each step along the way. At General Mills, which was my first role, I really learned the value of having a CEO, and it was Steve Sanger at that point, who clearly and consistently articulated a vision. And then, most importantly, let everybody else execute on it. Didn't get in there and meddle with it. And I really think that part of being a catalyst at that level is setting that clear vision and getting everyone else behind it and then off and running. At Disney, I really learned the power of partnerships in catalytic experiences. At this point, I think the partnership between Michael Eisner and his president at Disney, Frank G. Wells, is legendary. But it really was fascinating to see how powerful a catalyst like Michael Eisner can really become with the right people behind him and supporting them all the way through. And at the World Economic Forum, I got to work really closely with people creating change on the largest scales, whether they're heads of state or CEOs of Fortune 500 companies or Nobel Prize winners. And a couple come to mind in particular. One, Paul Pullman of Unilever. Yeah.
Yes.
Really, yeah. He made sustainability the rallying cry at Unilever and actually walked the talk. Absolutely incredible leader.
I have to footnote, I knew the guy who placed him at Unilever, so I've seen Paul Pullman's assessment on the scales that we talked about, and he is scientifically proven amazing, even before that.
We got the data to back it up.
Yeah, exactly. And another one was Beth Comstock of GE.
You're literally picking my favorite people,
Oh,
Tiffany.
really? Yeah. So, working with her was just absolutely incredible. She, she co-founded Hulu. She was someone who was able to, bring together traditionally warring factions with these broadcast networks and put them on a platform actually working together so that they could all survive in an online world. And, I think across the board, the lesson there was, working with people who really know how to operate inside and outside the systems they were handed, and how to change those systems from within once they're in there. And now at Ascent, we've been able to help people catalyze changes that they never saw themselves making. I'm thinking of one project, Steve, that we worked on. A group of executives working together to address DEI issues in their company. The most unlikely group of executives you would have imagined for that project. It was a group of mostly male white people. But they came together and they did it. They drove it through, and it has been a huge success for the organization. So I think that's
what made that group successful, do you think?
Steve, feel free to jump in here. I think one, we were able to take them on a journey and really help them see how important it is to listen to people differently. And so that was the kind of catalytic change that we were able to instill into that group of people. We had them have conversations they had never even considered having with the people that they worked with. And it made them think about everyone around them in a really different way. And Steve, what else would you add to that?
Yeah, and I'll build on that, too many people think that creating change is just telling people this is wrong. And sometimes they get to the point of saying, no, but this is right. And that shows up in DEI by kind of lecturing people as to how bad it is for some groups and how that's, and that's true. But that's not how you get people motivated to do something about it. Sometimes that actually raises defensiveness. So what we did was something different. We taught people to listen to what was going on with their employees. And then you get an emotional engagement with it. Because managers don't want to be bad managers, right? They want their people to be excited. And our belief is that if you are a good manager, you are making the best use of all your people, which is a simple definition of management, but it's also inclusion. Mm-hmm. So teaching them to listen meant they got emotionally engaged in making change to help their people. And if everybody did that, there might not be a problem. Mm-hmm. And we had people telling us things like, I thought I was pretty cool. I mean, this is actually a direct quote. I thought I was pretty cool. I talked to my HR guy, and I thought I understood his problems, and I was wrong. And now I feel like I know what I'm doing. And years later now, they're still leading the effort in their firms because they've got engaged in it. So that's a big trend. That's a big theme for us, is we try to get involved with people's emotional drives, not just the intellectual value, but get people excited. And this is the joke I always tell about development in general, which is how many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but the bulb has to want to change. And that applies to catalysts. You have to be someone who can get someone to want to change.
Any other thoughts, Steve, for you about what you've gleaned from other successful catalyst leaders?
I mean, we can build on this, and Tiffany, feel free to jump in. But we both talked about kind of influencing people, and if you want to be a catalyst executive, we think that's key. We see three key abilities, and Tiffany gave examples of each of them: the ability to collaborate, to create relationships across boundaries, the ability to lead a team and empower them to act, and then, basic change leadership, aligning an organization to get excited about doing things differently. All those things are about multiplying your impact across people, right? Now, if you're driven by the desire to have an influence on people, then that's going to be fun. But there's another category of motivation that drives people, which is known as the achievement motive, which is I want to fix things. I want to fix this myself. and it fits a bit with Tiffany's, I like checking things off my list, right? So if you're driven by achievement, it's much more about, I enjoy fixing it myself, and I see better ways of doing things, and I'm constantly innovating, but I'm not always thinking about bringing people along. Whereas the influence motivated people are all about the people, but sometimes they're not always thinking about better. Sometimes they're just thinking about, I got everybody lined up. That's the good thing. So a great catalyst, I think, kind of can bring both together. They can bring the value of achievement, but the excitement about getting people on board and moving.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of what Tiffany's talking about is partnerships. The partnership at Disney, I think, in some respects, was the creative innovator, let's change the world, coupled with, but what's going to work? With, Frank Wells was the one who kind of was the rational one, whereas I guess Eisner was visionary. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, Tiffany. But yeah. So bringing those together literally, two people.
I love the combination of your lists, right? From vision, partnerships, really listening differently. It's a big one. It's a big one we identify speaking and doing research with Catalyst executives, and then kind of bridging that into influence and the balance of achievement and excitement. I'd love to bounce from this to talk a little bit more about challenges, which has been in the seam of what you've been talking about. And Tiffany, I want to go back to something you said as we bridge into this. Is you made the shift from Disney and General Mills into the World Economic Forum, wanting to work in nonprofit. Can you talk a little bit more about the difference between the making change in organizations versus behind the scenes? I'm so curious what that means for our Catalyst audience and how they would make that choice in their career.
Yeah, it's a really great question. When you are in a traditional CPG, consumer packaged goods company like a General Mills or an entertainment company like Disney, it is very clear what the goal is. The goal is to make money for everybody, right? Everybody knows what their marching orders are. They know what they have to do, and there you go. That is not the case at an organization like the World Economic Forum. We lived in a realm of ambiguity at all times. And I think getting really comfortable with that ambiguity and being able to step back and say, okay, I don't actually know how this is going to turn out, but I'm just going to give it a try. I'm going to figure out who the people are, either inside the organization or outside the organization, who do have that global stage to create that global change that I was talking about before, and really try to rally them around the cause that I am passionate about and that I'm tasked with driving forward as part of this organization. An example of that is I led a sustainability project at the World Economic Forum with a board of 12 C-suite executives across, I think, 10 different industries. And I did a lot of work to figure out who would be the right people with the right personalities from those industries and from those companies to drive that change forward. It goes back to that behind the scenes. There's a lot of behind the scenes work and thinking about how you're going to bring all of these people along in a way that I don't think you have to do as much in a traditional corporate setting. Of course, you have to bring people along in a corporate setting. It's kind of at a whole different level at an organization where the mission is literally to improve the state of the world, which could be anything.
Right.
And so I think it's just leveling up in a really big way.
Okay. That's really, it's so interesting to think about that, because I think what I'm hearing is that in a place like the World Economic Forum, there's, you don't really know who the actors are going to be, even though they've already raised their hands, that you have to really be doing additional sifting, that maybe in a corporate environment, things are a little bit more clear. That's what we've never,
you're given, in a corporate environment, in a lot of cases, this, I think, is changing. There's a lot more matrixed organizations and things like that now, but in a lot of cases, you know who your team is to get something done.
Yeah.
Whereas, in an organization like the World Economic Forum or, others that are a little bit more ambiguous, you're you're in charge of creating that team. You need to build the team to get the work done. And there has to be a lot of emotional intelligence to understand who those people are, what types of people you need to bring along on that journey with you to really affect that change too.
That's so interesting. Thank you. And I'd love to broaden it too, to understand in general for you as a catalyst across these different environments, what are some of the challenges that you find that you, other catalyst executives, commonly face?
I think for me, the biggest one that I've experienced is when you're in an organization that says, we want change, we want change, we want change, and then it turns out they don't actually want the change. And, that's
both experienced that.
Yeah. And that's something that I've experienced at a couple of points in my career. And that's tough. You go out there, you prototype products, you prototype projects, you test them out, you think you have the support behind you from the organization. And even if you get incredible results, at the end of the day, the answer can be actually just no, we're just not going to do it. And it is deeply frustrating. It is deeply demotivating as well, both for yourself as the leader of the team in charge of this. And, you've rallied your group around this, what you've been told is a really important project for the organization. And then the organization comes in and says, oh, no, just kidding. We're not going to do it after all. I think that is one of the most difficult things to deal with as a catalytic leader. Just coming to terms with that and learning not to take it personally, to be honest with you.
And if you ever can, right?
If you ever can, yeah. If you ever I have not mastered that.
Yeah. So this is a really common challenge that our audience faces. And I'm curious, with the benefit of hindsight, were there signs? Like what wisdom can we glean from this challenge, as so many have this challenge ahead of them?
Yeah, I think for me, so there's one example that I'm thinking of where I was tasked with creating new digital business models for an organization. Turned out the organization was not at all ready for new digital business models, just wasn't. And I thought I had done the influencing within the organization that I needed to, and I hadn't. And so I think, if I had to go back and do that again, I would be much more savvy about rallying that internal influence network around me. I was really good at rallying the external influence network. I did not rally the internal influence network the way I needed to. And so being able to do both of those is really important.
What would that have looked like as we think about kind of the magic wand to overcome this?
Yeah.
What does that take?
So for me, I think it was a few things. One was I was based in one city, the headquarters was in another city. I think I needed to be much more present in the headquarters location, just given the politics of that organization. Just because it was such a face-to-face organization. No surprise, they weren't so into digital business models. I really needed to be physically present. And that really, I do think, would have made a big difference, being able to have the hallway conversations that you can't have from 6,000 miles away, things like that. Yeah.
Could you have seen it in the moment? That's really the thing I'm curious about, right? This is like, did it take going through it to understand the culture? Or was there signs, but in your excitement, we couldn't stop and see it?
I think there was some signs, but I thought I could overcome them. And I didn't.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, I'm curious.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to jump in because underneath this, and now I'm pulling from my own experiences, you're still getting, it sounds like, you're still getting some verbal yeses. So it's when do you know that verbal yes or that head nod is not genuine? Or in your experience, a follow-up question is, I'm often curious, did they really truly think they wanted it at some point, so it wasn't even disingenuous? And then when shit got real, it's oh, not ready.
I think it was the latter, to be honest with you. Yeah. Yeah, because why would they have put all the resources toward it,
And
right?
so,
Right.
what's your advice to catalysts when that's the reality? Because I think that is often true.
Yeah, and I think that's where the don't take it personally really comes in. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not
Ouch.
real. It's the ouch. It's
Yeah.
And so
yeah.
how do we deal with that, right? You hit that moment, as you said, it's not just you, you have a team. Like, what have you learned in moving through that moment? So I hear the don't take it personally. How do we do that, Tiffany?
Well, the funny thing is that after that experience, I actually left the organization and started my own company.
So it was a catalyst for you.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
To our benefit. So
I decided I didn't want to bang my head against the wall anymore. And like I said, I have not figured out how to not take that personally.
Yeah.
So I left. And I learned that just because an organization says they want catalysts doesn't mean they actually do want catalysts. They think they
Yeah.
might. They might not actually.
Yeah.
And so I decided to go off and be my own catalyst with an amazing group of people. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Because I hear a permission in that of like, if you hit a situation that is really that hard and it's hard to not take it personally, take the learnings from it and figure out what the next step is for you. You don't have to stay and make it okay and continue to bang your head against the wall. That might not be the message to our audience. And so it sounds like for you, it was like, yeah, no, this is a sign to some extent of being ready for a new environment.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Anything else that you want to share in terms of the challenges that we're all up against out in the world?
Not for me, but Steve, maybe you have something you wanted to add.
Well, and
yeah,
Steve,
and I would add that.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
To add to Tiffany's story, I mean, I think another way of looking at it is you've taken them as far as they can go.
Yeah.
And sometimes people need to process before they can move any further.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily that you've failed or you've made any mistakes. It's you've pushed them right to the limit, and you can take pride in that. But sometimes
I think what's also interesting, Steve, the pattern that I see there often is then there's this like pause, and then they'll pick up the things that you had started. Like I'm guessing that business
Yep.
that you were working for, Tiffany, didn't just reject digital forever, right? And so you became the spearhead of some of the work.
Yeah, then COVID hit and everything had to go digital.
There we
So
go.
to your point, Steve, I think it is really interesting. It's like it's a not right now moment. They're going on their own journey. And so, if we can go back with some sense of accomplishment, and then they couldn't have done the next things that they did. I'm not saying that happens every time, but.
Yep.
I'm curious, this is something, the balance between throwing yourself into it, right? There is a lot of emotional work we need to do to be able to recognize the opportunity, to do the networking that you're talking about, Tiffany, and do it even more than really you thought, like flying out there, being in person, identifying these folks. And then to you, Steve, the clinical like pullback of recognize it's not a fail. How do people toggle, right? Like, what does it take to be able to be in it and throwing your energy and be able to pull back and look at the system and say like, oh, it was a positive impact. It's not a fail.
Years of therapy.
Well, that's why I asked you, Steve, to the psychologist, right? Like, what advice do you
I'm not a
have
clinical
for us?
psychologist, but I can play one on video. But seriously, it is very hard. If you're the kind of person that wants to catalyze things with the emotional commitment, the emotional drives we've been talking about, you're doing it because it feels good and it's exciting and it's energizing, but it's also the source of your frustrations if it gets blocked. So it's very hard to disengage from your motives, and you can't really because they're a part of you. So some of it is, I think, having a community around you and colleagues who can help. Having the network of people who can act as your reality check or the kitchen cabinet they talk about for CEOs, someone who isn't reporting to them, but can advise them, and we've built some of that into the way we develop leaders at Ascent is, we've built cohorts and networks, and we've also taught people to try to look for who's out there that can help you. because it's not just
Yeah.
you. And that can be the temptation, especially when it's about your emotional engagement, that I want to do this because it's exciting to me.
Yeah.
And you sometimes have to stop and say, wait a minute, who else can help me so I'll have a higher chance of success, or reality check me when I know
Yeah.
I've gone as far as I can go.
It's just so much good wisdom there. I remember during COVID reading research that, helped us all understand that one of the reasons we were all so frustrated, anger, we're seeing violence go up, is exactly as you said, is that when our goals are blocked,
Yep,
right, we erupt in anger when we cannot achieve the things we want. And so this is a very normal physical, emotional response for us as catalysts in the moment that Tiffany's bringing forward. And I love this
absolutely.
anecdote of that I may not always be able to do the toggle to pull back and look at it clinically and come in, but a group of people around me can help me see things from different perspectives, can help me see the wins, and it may not be a fail, even if I'm feeling deeply blocked. It's a great frame on something that we hear a lot, but rather than just like, oh, it's good to have a mentor, like that really grounds it in the science of why that's so powerful.
We've actually known for decades that one way to deal with stress, people deal with stress better if they have a strong social network. And I think one of the double whammies of COVID is it removed us from personal interactions with people, or at least it
Right.
seemed like it. I'll just say that I had a group of friends that started meeting by video for COVID, some of whom I didn't know. It was like introduced through friends, and we have now met every weekend for years by video still, because we're all over the country, and they're some of my closest friends.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Amazing.
yeah, I mean, you need to manage yourself. It's not enough to just drive in and beat yourself up.
Yeah. I think it's one of the powers for Shannon and I in being co-CEOs. And I wonder if it's something you two enjoy as well, right? Is
Yep.
that when we have moments of like that, like, oh, shame, I must have done it wrong. And then the other person can be like, no, you didn't. Like that was fine. Like, this thing happened and you dealt with that. And you have that instant feedback of someone to help you reframe. So yeah, oh, thank you. That's
I,
super helpful.
may not should be me that says this, but we have a very collaborative culture by
Oh,
deliberate
for sure.
intent. That so Tiffany and our colleagues and me, and we will get together and thrash things out because nobody does everything anyway. So collectively we might know a
What?
little less.
What?
Yeah, I know, shocking, but
Shoot. I really thought I had that cornered. So,
there's
Steve,
also a point.
yeah,
Sorry, go on.
I was gonna say, I would love to kind of continue in here in your journey as a catalyst. What else have you found? What other wisdom have you uncovered for fellow catalyst executives that we want to make sure that we name today?
So there's one thing that Tiffany's alluded to, and I want to kind of make more structured, which is sort of a scale of change leader. And not even a sort of, we have one, right? We actually measure this in great precision, but I can describe it a little more easily, which is early on, you accept change. You think that change is good. The step above that is to be able to say, you know what? I'm going to be active about this. We need to change this. This is wrong, or the status quo is not acceptable anymore. And that's good up to a point, but you can become just a gadfly. It's just, the complainer, right? And this has actually become the problem in things like DEI efforts, because people misinterpret what's going on as, it's just complainers, which is one reason why we tried to make sure everybody was engaged, that it's everybody's issue, right? All leaders are trying to manage everybody. The step above that, though, is to moving out of the, this is wrong, to we need to carry a vision of what is right. Let's get people positively excited about moving in a new direction. And that's where you start going from the criticism to the positive, to the excitement of being a change agent. But for executives, it's got to go a step further still. So Tiffany and I have both been in internal situations where we could act at that level and be effective. Because it wasn't our job to drive all the change. It was our job to get other people aware that we needed to do it. The level above that for a senior executive is to empower other people to be the change agents. So they
Yes.
carry the message and they carry the vision. So you're generating this. And some of that is sometimes giving up a little ego, that as long as the change happens, does it matter who's in front?
100%. It's a huge derailer we see for the Catalyst executive, and a big differentiator between the more junior Catalyst and the more and folks who make it to the executive ranks.
And that's why I said the emotional component, right, is I'm excited about making this change and I want to show it. And sometimes
Right.
it's like, wait a minute, is my real excitement about being the person in front or about seeing the change happen?
That's right. That's right.
There
That's
is a nuance to that though, because we often, like, that is, both things are true, but I'm wondering if you have advice for this other one, because it's like there's a lovely gentleman in our network, and he was definitely a servant leader. He's a hyper catalyst, and part of his management style was, and this is what we teach, you have to create change through people, right? But he sublimated his own ego almost to such an extent
Too
that
far.
like everyone got promoted above him, and when the next like almost C-suite level happened, they hired someone else because they had associated this person with a transformation initiative that he had led that was successful. And they said that because he went and he asked, is like, I really need some feedback here, and they're like, oh, we didn't know that you really had a role in that. So I'm wondering if there's like how advice that you would have to balance that for people.
It's a tricky point because it's the issue that sometimes to make the change happen, people have to know that you did it without you patting yourself on the back publicly all the time. It's a problem we've seen because great leaders are often humble leaders. And right. So it's sort of the drawback of that is they're so humble that nobody knows they're the leader.
Right. And it's like they don't get licensed to operate again in this example, right? Because it's like the
Right.
demonstration of impact. Yeah.
And I can say that after a certain point in an organization, they may not have that opportunity again. And that's unfortunate, but it's coming back to Tiffany's point that the way to establish that might be to go at least investigate other opportunities, because sometimes that will reassure you, and let all those people you helped be your references to prove that you can do it somewhere else. That's one option, and there are other options, but it depends on kind of how far back the influence cycle needs to be, right? If people give you the credit, then you don't need to take the credit, if that makes sense.
It does. And it comes back to me about that super intentional network that you were talking about, like the mentors and stuff, because if you're bringing them into the trenches with you and through your process, you know, again, without, you know, an overdeveloped sense of ego, they become your spokespeople in a way. So I think there's
That's right.
interesting intention around curating some of those people who will be sitting in the room talking about you when you're not there.
And it does matter who it is. So there was a point in my career, and I'm not going to be too specific, where I had a colleague who was absolutely my advocate and pitched me entirely the wrong way. And had he told me what he was planning, I would have told him I knew it was wrong, that what he was going to do was arouse resistance.
Yeah.
That's what happened. And that's ultimately a firm I left because there was nowhere for me to go. And that's, you know, that was their culture. And that's something, and it's possible I could never have gotten past that barrier. And in fact, now they've changed like 10 years later. But
that's right. Sometimes
but,
it is what it is, and it's
it
out
is
of our
what it
control.
is.
You go back to then, are we staying or not? All right. What I'm feeling right now is from both of what you guys have just shared, it's like it's a lot of emotional labor and toll on us personally. So if you could really briefly, Steve, how do you manage your energy, or how have you seen people manage their energy to avoid like the total catastrophic burnout?
Well, I mean, part of what we teach is that you want to align your motivation as much as possible with the role that you have. So you enjoy not just the outcomes, but the day-to-day process of what you do. So if you enjoy it, then it's going to generate energy for you. If you're having to force yourself to do everything that you know it's important to do, but you don't really want to, that's what's exhausting, and that's what's draining over time.
Smart advice.
So that would say understand which emotions you have. So I mentioned, the achievement mode of wanting to go fix it and do things better myself versus influence. You can have both. The third is affiliation, which is I like to be part of a friendly group. I'm just going to say I'm high on all three, which means being an entrepreneur in a small group that is creative and has an impact on developing people is perfect, because I've had hyphenated titles my whole career because I'm trying to appeal to everything. That to me is part of kind of, you have to understand yourself versus the role you're playing. You can do something different, but it must be conscious that you are choosing to do that. And then you can kind of propel yourself long enough to get it done.
Awesome.
And I think there's also a point, and I'm making this, and Tim and I have been talking about this because I have a book coming out next summer on stages of leadership and categories of leadership. And one of the things I think a lot of leadership books leave out is sometimes you have to stop. There's a point at which you are as far as you should go. And after that, you're not going to be happy anymore.
We don't talk about that enough. I totally agree. Totally.
Because our culture is so focused on the achievement got to move up, got to keep going. And it's like, why? If you are satisfied, happy, productive, and coming back to my late mentor, David McClellan, when they founded McBurr in the 60s, their motto was to make the world happy, productive, and free. And it's like, I'm good with that.
I could get behind that. Totally. Tiffany, how about you? How do you manage your energy through those ups and downs?
Yeah, I think what Steve said is so important, just making sure that you personally are aligned with the work that you're doing. I mean, that when I talked about like the so what that I felt at the end of every day, that's why I left where I was and went more into the service side of things. So I think that really is the key one. On a day-to-day basis, though, to be honest with you, it is something I need to get a lot better at. Because I am that achievement person. I am the person who is always driving, always trying to achieve whatever goal is in front of me. And I think what tends to keep me sane is being able to pull back a little bit and say, okay, let's forget the day-to-day goals for a minute. What's the big goal that we're really trying to achieve right now? I can get very lost in the just checking off the list. And so it's like, okay, but what's the big goal? How do we move toward the big goal?
Yeah, and it's going back to something Tracy pulled out earlier. It's like the zooming in, the zooming out, and being able to do that on a pretty regular basis. And what I hear is the network can be a support for that. All right. Tiffany, I'll call on you. Do you have a call to action for our listeners? What are you hoping that, they'll achieve in the world?
Ooh, call to action for your listeners. I would say, if you are the behind the scenes person, you are just as valid of a catalytic change leader as someone who is out in front. And I think it's an underestimated role that a lot of people play. And so I think it's one that everybody should be proud of.
Amazing. Steve, final call to action for listeners?
Gosh, I don't know how to beat what Tiffany said. Catalysts are where you find them. And part of it is to understand what kind of catalyst you are and to find your peace with that. And then you can enjoy it.
Amazing. Amazing. Yes, yes, yes. This was a fantastic conversation. We could talk for hours and hours, but thank you so much for sharing the depth of your wisdom with us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Indeed. You're very welcome.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about how to create bold, powerful change in the world, be sure to check out our book, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, which I have to throw in here. Beth Comstock also recommended. Or go to our website at catalystconstellations.com.
And if you enjoyed this episode the way that Shannon and I definitely have, please take a few seconds to rate it on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you're listening to your podcasts. And if you have other catalysts in your life, hit the share button, send a link their way. Thanks again.